Hello everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Speed and scalability matter. SANS review of LogRhythm 7 SIEM and analytics platform, sponsored by LogRhythm. My name is Carol, author of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Shackleford, SANS analyst, instructor, and course author; Seth Goldhammer and Vaughn Adams, both of LogRhythm. If during the webcast you have any questions for Dave, Seth, or Vaughn, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave.
Thanks so much, and thank you everybody for being here with us today. And so I'm excited to be here joined by some of the folks from LogRhythm. And let me see if I can just get my slide clickage. There we go. Awesome. So both Seth and Vaughn hanging out with me today. But really, this is going to be more of an overview, going through a review of the product set that I did just very recently. And in fact, there will be an upcoming sort of research paper being released around this review pretty shortly. But we wanted to give everybody sort of a preview of what we had done and sort of what the whole thing was all about. And that's what today's webcast is going to be focused on. So I'll give a little bit of a lay of the land, sort of, what we were doing and how we were doing it. And then I'm going to go through some really specific areas that we focused on during the course of this review, kind of trying to tie it back to what today's security operations teams really need and what they're going to be looking for if they're trying to implement or improve their product set in the environment around something like LogRhythm 7. So for those of you that have been hanging out in the past couple of days, you may have noticed that we just very recently finished up and released our 2016 SANS Security Analytics Survey, which we've now done for 4 years. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that here just because we've already done it and we've spent our time going through separate webcasts on it and have released that research paper. But there's so much great information that's incredibly just relevant to this review and what I did in this review and what I kind of just had top of mind in this review the entire time I was going through it, because I'm seeing these trends and I'm seeing these very specific types of pain points within people's environments all over the place. So when I'm not teaching for SANS and writing classes for SANS and reviewing things for SANS, I'm actually out and about in people's data centers, working with security ops teams, dealing with response cases, I mean the whole gamut of stuff that all of you are dealing with. And so I see this both, from an instruction standpoint, people that are coming to courses, trying to learn new skills, and then also people really struggling with this in their day-to-day positions. And we saw this reflected in the analytics survey too. A lot of people out there are, even with the tools in hand, feeling like it's still an incredible burden to come up with reasonable behavioral baselines of their environment. Not only that, but some of the most significant hurdles that we just covered in the analytics survey, just big challenges that people are having. Number one, skill sets. People just don't feel like they can perform the types of analytics duties they want to because they don't have the appropriate skills. And that, that also sort of reads to me that a lot of the tools and a lot of the tactics that have been emerging in the past couple of years, they're challenging, they're unwieldy, right? You need a PhD or maybe a few of them to just reasonably put together an analytics tool set and strategy. And that's not the answer, because we're not going to be able to train people up fast enough with that type of mentality to get the job done as quickly as we'd like. So skills are a huge burden. Building behavioral baselines are a big burden. Another, several challenges that we saw, just visibility. So we've seen an increase in people's visibility into the environment, but not necessarily at the pace that we thought. So bringing together disparate data sources, especially lots of data in big environments, and pulling it together in a way that allows us to start getting results and start getting baselines and start figuring out where those needles in the haystack might be. This is really still a big hurdle for folks. So what we're seeing now is the emergence of some tools, and I'm really glad to put LogRhythm 7 into this category, that are trying to solve those problems, that are looking to just get past some of these big barriers and stumbling blocks that we've noted in the past 4 years of doing this survey. Number one, ease of use. So I'm going to be talking about that here. I think, it's real easy to just sort of set that to the side when we're talking about advanced capability sets it's not a good idea to do that. And the reason is you're not always going to have people with 15 to 20 years of experience that need to jump in, learn some tools, and get started. Now, granted, to do deeper analysis of things going on in the environment, sure, that experience really matters. But I really don't want to have an incredible ramp-up period just to figure out what the heck I'm looking at and getting my devices and systems tuned in the first place. So ease of use to me is one of the most important and critical factors, and I'm going to talk to that about LogRhythm 7 in just a minute. Of course, speed matters, right? The efficiency and scale with which your product can operate makes a massive difference when you're talking about thousands, millions, more than that, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, whoever knows how many events sort of churning through your environment at all times in an incredibly distributed manner. Well, you got to get that data, and you got to be able to process it. And so we are going to be looking at scalability and that speed factor. And then, of course, once it's all there, how are you going to manage this stuff? So I need to be able to find what's going on in the environment. In other words, what pops out at me? Where's that aha moment coming from? And then once I get that aha moment, how do I take that, run with it all the way through a detection and response life cycle in such a way that I can collaborate more effectively with my peers in different areas of security and other places, and also capture that evidence in such a way that others can review it, and then it might even become evidence for retention later on. So there's a whole bunch of pieces that go along with a traditional security ops mindset, but I really want to sort of keep the mindset of the challenges in mind here, or keep that framework of those challenges in mind as we're going through. And that was some of the areas that, like I said, we reviewed when we went through LogRhythm 7. So this was our demo environment, and the folks at LogRhythm were nice enough to really sort of set up this massively scaled infrastructure for the SANS review team so that we didn't have to go build it out in our own data centers. And as you can see here, just at a glance, the demo environment had quite a few pieces to it. So we had a platform manager, we had a couple AI engines distributed, we had some processors, some indexers. We had a nicely sort of scaled infrastructure that I think really accurately mimics a nice-sized enterprise that would be dealing with a lot of data. The data is what comes into play here, though. So if you look at the bottom, three numbers here, that's where the mojo really happens, because we're talking about 130,000 distinct log sources. That's a huge number. Some of you guys may have really big shops that's similar to what you're running, or even above and beyond that. That's a lot, right? So if I can deal with 130,000 distinct log sources, I'm doing pretty well. 26 billion logs per day being generated by these log sources. So, I mean, again, staggering scale, huge numbers. And what we saw coming in, and this was accurately measured by the SANS team, and we worked with the folks at LogRhythm to sort of make sure we had the right viewpoints and the right tools and such to be able to measure this accurately. 300,000 messages per second. That is a lot of data. And I don't need to tell you that, right? You guys are all smart. You can take a look at that and realize, that scale that is certainly impressive, but that's what we're up against today, and that is what we're going to continue to be up against tomorrow, as the different folks coming in and responding to our survey told us time and time and time again, right? We have more data, more sources, and we need to be able to take it in and deal with it effectively. So what you see here in terms of the demo environment, let's call that reality, right? I mean, this is what it's going to be. Maybe not for everybody. It's not to suggest that everyone out there is going to be dealing with billions of logs per day, but it's pretty good to know that you can if you need to. So this is a simple breakdown of these components, and this is also detailed in the research paper that we'll be revealing, pretty shortly about this review, that of course sort of explains things in more detail and depth and sort of walks through stuff. But the platform components include the platform manager, which is where you're managing all of your alarms and alerts and notifications, and sort of perform the primary incident management tasks. We'll be doing searches here. This is where we're doing forensic analysis and reporting, and sort of the main platform, if you will. The AI engine performs stream analysis of a bunch of data coming in. So this is sort of machine data and forensic information, and so this is sort of the brains that takes all that data, performs some degree of normalization, and says, hey, you know what? this looks weird based on some of these other events that we've seen in the environment. And so this is this sort of contextual engine that helps us sort of separate things, reduces false positives, brings out those sort of blips on the radar, if you will, and works hand in hand with all of the other components of the environment. The data collectors, this is where we're actually gathering the data. So this is local and remote agentless collection. So we're sort of pulling everything in here. Those top three pieces sort of work together hand in hand all the time to be giving us prioritized alerting, which we'll of course see here in just a few minutes. System and network monitors, those are monitoring host level activity with things like authentication, changes to files, network communications at that host level. This is a piece that really adds an enormous amount of depth and context to the LogRhythm solution set, which is pretty cool. I think we all realize that the host, has a lot to play in this. People are getting targeted, so we're getting, desktop type scenarios or the server level situations where the real activity is going on. Being able to see that closely was huge. Same thing at the network, of course, doing deep packet inspection. So we're able to do full packet captures and actually pull out PCAPs. Again, you'll see that. We have searchable metadata. Just great stuff pretty much across the entire environment. And then we have some processing and indexing platform tools that sort of take this stuff, slice it, dice it, and then allow us to start pulling this out, as well as performing the deeper dive analytics. So lots of stuff. I know that's a mouthful, but these are all pieces that were included and built into the architectural model used for this review. So good stuff. Nice to know what you're talking about when you start playing around and getting into the mix on this stuff. But before I can even start talking about all of the aspects of the review, I just have to emphasize that having spent really the last 15 to 20 years of my career dealing with security event management and monitoring environments, I've seen easier, and I've seen certainly more difficult. This trends towards the easier to get set up and spun up and running, and that's huge. So I'm not going to say that you're going to be able to just walk in, click, click, plug, plug, click here, and you're done. There's more to it than that, but it's definitely nowhere near as challenging as some others that I've worked with. So this is great news. Again, with some sort of focus and attention, you can get this deployed, I think, more easily than some of the others I've watched. Different features, right? So some of the things that we took a look at as part of this review process. Number one, just an incredibly flexible back-end search algorithm. And so Elasticsearch is what LogRhythm's now using for their query engine. And we've seen a little bit of this in the past and sort of kept looking at this in this current review. And it's just improving over time, which is awesome. I mean, really what we're talking about here is almost a true unstructured data modeling approach for being able to flexibly search across just staggering quantities of data and to get results from that search really, really fast. That's the name of the game to me. I mean, if I'm looking at an indexing, platform, and fundamentally, when you're talking about a sort of search query for an event management tool, I need data quick, right? If I am looking for a keyword, or if I'm looking for a specific query that I've formulated for one case or another, I don't want to sit there for an hour waiting for it to churn through before it tells me that there's nothing going on. Like I need that data fast. And when you're talking about the event sort of magnitude that we mentioned a minute ago, you're talking billions of events, you're talking just huge scale. That says a lot if you can get your results back, maybe not in every case instantaneously, but, a couple seconds. I mean, that's amazing. So this is a pretty useful way to immediately start getting value out of the system once it's aggregating and collecting data. The web-based query interface was really nice. So it had native language searching, it had contextual searching. You'll see some examples of that here in just a second. So you can sort of just go in and look up keywords. I mean, imagine the just search box and you type something in there. Or you can come up with some really more advanced types of queries that you can save and reuse and so on too. So great stuff. Lots of different systems and network events and so forth. So pretty much any data that you can imagine you can throw in here, and it's going to be able to parse and properly deal with. At least in the context of our review, we didn't run up into any that just didn't jive, right? So that's huge. You got to be able to take in all the data. And then it just gets down into sort of the day-to-day management and the results coming back to this. So I need to be able to use this platform as a central engine, and that's where that case management comes into play. So if I'm going to use this as sort of my primary means of not only communicating with, but collaborating with all of the other team members, some of whom could be in different locations, some of whom could be on different shifts that I need to hand things off to, I got to capture this stuff, and I got to be able to capture it in a way that if I'm on second shift in the SOC and I leave and somebody comes on, they can immediately jump in, they're tagged in it, they can go in and see what's going on and keep up with that in a fairly seamless manner. So that's huge. Finally, the host-based policies and response tools. This is definitely an area where we took a bit closer look than we have in the past, taking a look at some of the host-based agents and some of the policy sets that could be put into place effectively across those hosts through the system as well. So these are all places that we focused on, some of the newer and sort of differentiated features of the product, but there's a lot to say here, and there's a whole lot of things that we spent time on and drilled down into and really just tested out as we went through this review process. So let me start off with dashboards. I mean, anybody that's ever dealt with a SOC, everybody that's ever dealt with a, an analytics tool or an event management platform of any sort, there's something to be said for the dashboards. and there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, look down deep, just admit it. You all like pretty pictures. We all sort of do. And I will prioritize some pretty pictures as long as they're useful pretty pictures that allow me to get to what I want quickly. But these are the kinds of things that you would put up on the wall at the SOC. These are the kinds of things where you can customize your user interface. This is where you spend your time, in other words. You're going to start here in a lot of cases and then drill down. So what you see here is one example of a dashboard that we used during the review, but I think you guys can probably guess intuitively that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You can easily customize this with whatever the heck you feel like putting in there. So logically, I mean, I think what you see here is a pretty, let's call it a vanilla dashboard for a typical SOC environment. That's fine. This is the kind of stuff most SOCs would probably want. I want to see how well I'm performing. So my log processing rate, take a look at that number. I mean, 301,000 events per second, messages per second. That's insane. That's incredibly good rates. We want to see that and just make sure that our performance is up to snuff. I also want to see some general trending in terms of alarms. So what you see over here, again, I want to look at things like, how many logs are getting processed. I want to see sort of when they're getting processed and whether or not there's lags or weird things going on, just in terms of like a macro level trend. And then I get down into the weeds. So I look at the classification of some of the events. I look at the top events that I'm seeing. I look at some of the major source types, so whether that's syslog or other places that I'm generating this stuff. Major hosts that are acting up or exhibiting some sort of weird behaviors. Applications, where things are coming from and going to, if I've got defined subnet ranges and regions. I mean, you name it. These are just examples. We sort of tinkered around and played with stuff. But the beautiful thing about this UI is that it's really easy to customize and tweak on your own. So you can add in cool. We can develop our own dashboards. And for any of you that have managed SOC teams or been a part of SOC teams, everybody sort of has their own mindsets on this. And you may have a couple different dashboards for different types of scenarios. So here again, looking at the UI, we just wanted to go in and do some searches. So we went in and started digging across, the different kinds of categories with the classification of malware, right? Talk about, like super generic search. That's fine. That was the goal. I just wanted to see how things worked and how fast they came back across this massive data set. And sure enough, we got data back incredibly fast, right? So just looking for any events, and you can see what I sort of pieced together in this intelligent sort of search build engine. I'm looking for classification of malware pretty much across anything. So boom, where did I see malware, right? What sort of events showed up with that type of classification, and we got our result sets back, like I said, really, really fast. So this was nice. You'll see that what we're looking at primarily as like a day-to-day. Now, in the past example, I went through malware and I said, I just want to go look for stuff. Now, if you're in the middle of a case, or if you're actively using the platform to look up something, and we will show some cases here in just a bit, then you're going to spend a bit more time in the search. You're going to be putting together searches, and you're going to be using that probably with a bit more specificity than just going, hey, show me malware. But where you're really going to get sort of that aha moment in most cases, if you've got all your data being fed in, and you've got that AI engine processing, and this is sort of at the heart of all this, that AI engine is looking at all this data that's getting crunched and correlated, the analytics processing is being done in the background, then the overlay of that AI engine says, there's a whole bunch of things we're seeing here, but let's prioritize this for you so that you can focus on one or more that might be a bit more risky or scary than some of the other stuff going on. And while this is not necessarily the most exciting slide, right? I mean, if you see this, there's a bunch of different things that are sort of laid out here, but they all kind of have the same risk categorization or ranking. Well, that's not always going to be the case. If I've got this as, let's call this my normal baseline, right? And I'm not saying this is a good or a bad baseline. I'm just saying, hey, I've got at least some semblance of normalcy in my environment going on right here. Well, what happens if all of a sudden one of these boxes pops up with a risk rating of 85 or 90? And, I've got a bunch of 50-ish type risk ratings that I'm aware of, I've been keeping up with, sort of keeping an eye on, we're tracking, there are cases, whatever. And then all of a sudden I get something that's way higher. Well, you know what? That, my friends, is the beautiful thing you wait for as a SOC team or as an analyst that goes, yeah, you know what? Let's pivot and head off towards this guy because this could be a real risk that's happening right now. We've got some things that we need to tangibly follow up on in order to gather the data necessary to investigate. So this is a great place to sort of spend time in this alarms sort of tab within the LogRhythm interface, giving us the ability to start drilling in as we need to, and that's where we'll go in a moment. But I like this kind of one-shot view of the things happening with some risk ratings that speak to that. We'll be going into some different cases here in just a moment, but if I'm exploring this UI, you can see that I've got different cases going on, at any given time, and I can see those in the individual cases tab. But I think one of the things that impressed me the most was the way you could sort of easily switch back and forth between an existing case and some of the events that were related to it. And so you could see them in different places in different ways. So it's not as though you have to just hang out here in the Cases tab in order to see aspects of those cases. We can flip back over into some of the alarms related to that. We can go do some other things as well. And it's all just nicely integrated together so that we can generate the cases easily. We can then monitor those cases ongoing. We can add evidence to the cases. We can follow up on them. We can close them out. We can report on them. It's just not a hard thing to sort of get back and forth between different places here. And to me, that just makes it more usable. So this is primarily focused around the usability of the system more than anything else. But as I said, you'll see sort of in a minute where we started building some of these cases and then leveraging them. Reporting, super easy. So we don't go into a whole bunch of different reports in this review. We've done that in past reviews. So we didn't repeat that. The reporting certainly is just as easy as it's ever been. It's easy to make up your own reports. It's easy to leverage some of the canned reports that the folks at LogRhythm have put together. You can easily go, build your own sort of, reports that you want for compliance or reports that you want for just day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month type of metrics and charting and tracking. And, as you can imagine, this is a mature platform. So there's a pretty significant number of pre-built reports that you can immediately start making use of, right? This isn't the first rodeo for the folks at LogRhythm, so they've seen lots of people's security operations centers and what they need and want. And so sure enough, you're going to be able to go and track, different types of activities, different types of metrics related to events, related to cases, related to just about anything you can imagine. But as with anything, I don't think I've ever met a SOC team that didn't want to tweak some of their own reports and manage them themselves. Good news is you can do that pretty easily without having to have 16 months of professional services to help you. You can control access into the UI very readily as well. So AD accounts and groups are easy to just sort of integrate. And for most of you, if you're basing your, sort of user-based access off something like AD and the groupings in OUs and so forth there, this is seamless. So you create the groups that you want to give access to, then you can map that into LogRhythm roles, whether they're administrators or sort of more of a read-only, or if you have, say, a particular case where you need a business unit representative or someone from IT to access that case and evidence and sort of chime in or contribute in some way. Super simple to do. So once again, what you're trying to avoid is complexity that could ultimately lead to, in a case like this, and having worked in enough security ops groups to see this happen more than once, it's real easy to sort of over-provision privileges where people get access to things maybe they shouldn't see. I mean, imagine a case where you had an insider threat and you accidentally sort of over-provisioned to an entire group or to people that you didn't want there, and somebody could go in and see stuff that, maybe they were a part of the investigation and they shouldn't have known that. So, like, again, I know that's sort of a generic example, but it is really important to restrict and control the level of access that's being granted to a system like this, given the sensitivity and the nature of the data that's coursing through here at all times, whether that's a case or whether it's just event data. Any and all of it is something that should be very constrained from, the organization's different groups and members. Monitoring stuff, you can see here, pretty easy for me to go and just monitor all of my sources of events and all of my processing components. So if you're just wanting to make sure that the environment is healthy, well, there's plenty of tools built in that allow you to do that readily. So you can go and make sure that, your performance is up to snuff. The number of collectors are what you expect to have, in the environment, how many events they're processing through, so you can see sort of current processing rates, the average processing rates. You can chart that pretty readily and sort of monitor it visually, as you can see here. This is more for the operations, just, like I said, sanity checks, making sure that everything's humming along as it should. And it allows you to get in front of potential issues if perhaps a system is having a hardware issue or something's going on in the environment. So this is just stuff we had to make sure we did a gut check on and sort of checked on stuff. So if you take a look at the component status, this was sort of our first scenario just to get in and say, hey, what was my log volume, right? Taking a look at the first scenario. Of really just performance. In this review, we sort of picked a couple places we wanted to focus on. Performance was one of those. And so we did take a look at the processing volume. We did want to make sure that, sort of over the course of the review, we were checking back here. I won't say that we like hung out on this, on this dashboard and just sat there and watched over and over and over. But throughout the course of the review, we kind of repeatedly came back just to make sure that, for instance, those processing rates were where we wanted them to be, and that things weren't dropping down and so on, and that if they were, we sort of noted that and could see it readily, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. It was just a dashboard that was built to allow for some of that monitoring. And as part of that first scenario, we were focusing specifically around speed and scalability. We had about 20 data processors handling in the neighborhood, upwards of about 15,000 messages per second for each. And so if you combine that, that's logically what's going to get you to this number here of about 302,000 kind of aggregate messages per second. It's all about scale. So this is a sort of flexible framework that was built specifically to allow a distributed event management model to work appropriately in a big environment. So 302,000, that's not one system per se, but that's a bunch of processors all taking in this data, churning it, and sort of building a data model on the back end. So going into our deployment, like I said, data processors we wanted to focus on, and we checked back periodically just to make sure that these guys were keeping up. And if you take a look at the numbers here, you'll see that for the most part, they all sort of fell within that range. In fact, the vast majority were just a bit above 15,000 per second, where a couple of them sort of dropped down depending on what was going on in that part of the network and so forth. But good, good speeds and feeds, all great stuff. We wanted to check on our log sources. So we had 60 collector agents deployed. We had 1,790 active log sources per agent, which again brought us to over about, again, 100,000 total log sources, which we mentioned right at the beginning. So lots of data out there, in other words. We wanted this to be a strongly scaled review to ensure that the system could basically handle all this stuff. And over the course of the time where we were reviewing, we found that there really weren't any hiccups. None of these guys, dropped off the face of the earth. We didn't see any significant lags in terms of processors being able to handle all of that data coming in from the log sources. So we were good. Again, it was nice to be able to see that scale working pretty accurately. We have 5 data indexer clusters. Each of these guys had 10 nodes. So we were indexing, again, about 60,000 messages per second in these clusters. So this is where we're performing sort of the analytics side of things. And on top of that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had 5 advanced intelligence or AI engines that were taking the data, pretty much in sequence. So as things were getting indexed and sort of correlated and normalized, they were also being fed into this AI engine that just has some intelligence there, right? And thus the name. This is looking at past behaviors, kind of known, sort of known good and bad that's been seen before. So there's really some pretty awesome stuff going on here. And really what you got to be careful of in a lot of solutions out there for this type of piece is seeing slowdown when you enable this, or seeing any sort of significant latency or sort of throughput challenges or response times start to drop by applying this AI or sort of intelligence layer on top of it. Didn't see that here. And so it's all sort of a seamless integration, which is exactly what we looked for. So the scale piece of this, just to wrap that up, did perform as expected. The environment was highly scaled out, lots of data coming in. We saw it churning in over the course of, really this review, sort of as a, rule of thumb. I think we went about 6 weeks total, sort of coming in at various times and doing just different pieces of this. And that scale was in place the whole time and was effectively churning and processing. So that's good news. The numbers seem to match up. The second thing that we wanted to take a look at, so sort of the second piece of the review, was really about the policy side. So we wanted to make sure we looked at these agents that could be deployed onto specific servers to be able to gather data, and then also to be able to really effectively sort of apply a policy to different server types and system types. And so we didn't create, a staggering realm of these. We only kind of handled a few. But as you can see here, we had different policies that were created for, say, a Windows file share versus a Windows-based web server. So we had different types of Windows systems with some different policies. And while we don't go through, say, every specific tab in this bottom part of the slide, you can see what's there, right? We've got the name of the policy. We've got some different processor settings, which we'll show you here in just one second. We've got things like syslog and flow settings that we may want to enable depending on the system. If you want to enable things like SNMP, you can. You've got different monitoring aspects to the endpoint, etc. And so what you're doing is creating, obviously, categorized monitoring scenarios that can be deployed with these agents. And the easier it is to do this, the better. I'm a simple man when it comes to this. I don't want this to be complicated. I don't want to have to get in and go, what the heck does this option even mean, right? And I've had that happen, and I think some of you have probably experienced that too. I want to be able to open this up, right? And so just to go back here, I'm going to actually take us back a slide just for 1 second. I want to be able to go into my config policy manager, and even if there's nothing there, I just want to create one from scratch that I can walk through and have a pretty good idea of what the heck I'm looking at, and then apply it maybe even to a test case system and see those options manifest pretty readily. And so again, I really don't want to underemphasize this. It's important. This configuration management and this sort of piece that goes to those endpoints, if you're talking scale of thousands of servers, you need to get this right. And it needs to be something that's not only easy to create, it needs to be easy to apply, and it needs to be easy to update. So assigning those policies was incredibly simple. And obviously, we're just kind of picking a few here. It's not as though we tried to go apply this to thousands of servers in our review. but we picked a few. We easily took something that had no policy assigned, chose a few of them, went into the configuration policy assignment, which is a right-click away, and chose the policy, pushed it out, boom, within seconds. We saw this thing take and go install this policy and put it into place. And that's where you start getting specific server or implementation levels of monitoring and so on. So you can see both of those policies that we just mentioned a moment ago easily applied. The nice thing too is and again, we didn't go through sort of an extensive business continuity level scenario here. We basically just did some test runs of fault tolerance because, look, in a big distributed shop, if you've got these agents feeding into a specific data processor, so in other words, I've got, let's say, different geographic locations or different types of business units in different places. Well, it doesn't make sense from sort of an architectural standpoint to have it all just feeding back to one data center. You may have different places where things are located, and so you want to make sure that you've got them going to the appropriate places, but in the case that one of them fails, there's a backup. Well, we tested that. And so what we did was essentially set up specific data processors that were assigned to some of the test systems, and then deliberately disabled them and watched the failover, in fact, actually occur. So you can't necessarily see it exactly in this slide, but you can see the data processor settings where we've got the priority of these guys. You start off with these, and then fail over to the next ones and so on and so on. But if you see the bottom piece, you can see that we had some of these different systems set to go to, the systems ending in 1 and 2, and we, purposefully cut that off on those guys to fail over into number 3, and they did just fine, right? So without a hiccup at all, immediately went over into that failover scenario so that you did not lose your data, and you didn't lose sort of that visibility into what was going on in the environment, even for, a few seconds, and a few seconds might matter. So as a security professional, again, I like that resilience, and I like just making sure that I've always got my data coming in no matter what. Systems fail, it's life, but we don't have to have that affect us as the security ops and monitoring team. So good stuff. All the fundamentals are there. We're excited. Let's talk about some different cases. And so we went through a few different cases here. I'm going to sort of just walk through them and touch on what I did and sort of what shook out of those. But we did 2 specific cases that just gave us opportunities to sort of see what was going on and really play with the system and see its capabilities in action. So what we had in the first one was an insider. All right, so you naturally, every system monitoring test should include somebody that's just disgruntled and up to no good. Those are fun cases, right? Define fun, I know, but we got one. So we got this guy that said, you know what, I hate this place. I'm gonna create myself an AD account. I'm gonna make myself a domain admin, and then I'm gonna go try to delete some stuff. I'm mad. I got passed over for that promotion. I'm gonna go in and wreak some havoc in the environment. And what we're looking for here naturally is speed of detection and really rapid response to minimize the damage done. This is a case that could really impact us badly if we don't have the right tools in place and things sort of ready to go. So first things first, we were already monitoring for the creation of privileged accounts. Well, boom, there you go. So anytime somebody creates a domain admin account, we're going to know about it immediately. And that's exactly what showed up here in my alarms tab. I've got an account added to an admin group, and it's got a pretty high risk associated with it. So I've got this risk immediately showing up where, hey, now I've got something that I need to probably go drill into and find out exactly what was being done and see whether or not this was legitimate. It could have been an approved change or something. Somebody needed this for a product implementation or something. Who knows? So now all we had is something to go on. We wanted to drill down into that, and that is exactly where we went. We took that immediate alarm, drilled down into it, and the GUI is just perfectly made for this. It's click, click, down we go. And so we drilled down into that and saw sort of the relation of things to this. And now you can tell, just taking a look at this, I mean, it's not like there's a million things going on, there's a few really specific things to take away from this. What we had is the origin user that created the account. So Vaughn Adams, Vaughn Adams, the evil Vaughn Adams, is obviously up to no good here. And so Vaughn is creating this new user called Curly Howard. So Curly Howard's no good, and really we're seeing the conjunction of those users as part of this evil activity. The domain admins group was the group involved. The event was an account added. We had a classification for that. We also saw the host where this was impacted, etc. But it's pretty easy to see exactly what went on. But these are the specifics. We know who created the account. We know what the account name is. We know that it's a privileged account. So the secondary activity that went along with that was the use of the Curly Howard account to then go delete files. Well, those deleted files triggered an alarm. Why? Because we had some automated monitoring policies built in and packaged onto that file server that told us, hey, this activity is going on. And with this, what's cool about this is that, number one, we can immediately go back and sort of see who did it and what happened. And so we saw that this Curly Howard user was involved in that activity. But to me, the best part of this is that we built some automation responses for this exact type of scenario. So in other words, if we see somebody just arbitrarily going in and deleting files based on our policy, we can have the LogRhythm Smart Response engine disable the account and log that user off, even as a temporary measure until we can figure out what the heck is going on. Now, if it all turns out to have been a big mistake and you've got a domain admin that, for whatever reason, was just trying to clean up a file share or something and just went and did this, well, guess what? You can go and re-enable the account and everything's hunky-dory and off you go. But if you do have a case of a malicious inside scenario, this is an awesome way to immediately put a stop to it before it gets any worse. And that was awesome. So all of that happened, again, immediately. We were notified that those activities occurred. We can go down in there and sort of drill down in to that mass file deletion activity that we just saw a minute ago. And as you can see here, we can see the files that were actually deleted or that, that the user attempted to delete. We saw the logon activity. We saw the access activity. We saw the Curly Howard user in place. So all of those pieces are immediately available as part of this case. And so again, you can go and drill down even further into the user origin. And so again, you can see repeated access by Curly Howard with all of those files being deleted. So there's, again, some specific tie-ins to that user that we can then retain, as part of the evidence of the case if we need to go figure out what was actually happening. So we can pivot directly from that event. So we've got those events. We can then kind of pivot directly over into, whatever else has been going on with that Curly Howard. So in other words, we have one event or sort of type of event that we now know he did, but the question is, hey, have we seen Curly Howard doing other things, right? Is there other are there other types of classifications or events that have been associated with that user? And so that's a simple pivot, right? We can see not only other things happening, access being granted, accounts created, different authentication, processes being started. I mean, who knows, whatever else is going on with that user. But the other thing we can do is find out whether there were, potentially other things involved with that user. So you can see things like services. We can see Vaughn Adams tied to that user now, of course, which we sort of knew from before, but here it's just sort of brought out even more. We see other systems that the Curly Howard user might have accessed. So the list goes on, and the point is, from one thing happening, we can drill down, we can immediately pivot to find other data, and then we can sort of go in whatever direction we want. So had we wanted to create another case around this or drill even further, we could have. But that was my first case of just, walking through, finding some good stuff. Second case, a little bit more involved, but a pretty common one. We sort of went through a user that got phished, and this user had something dropped on the box, right? So something, we'll call it an O-day, but only because it didn't get picked up by any virus. So it's something that obviously didn't have a signature associated with it. After that was dropped, we saw lateral movement and attempts at data exfiltration to a location that was in fact noted as suspicious on a threat list that was being integrated into our environment already. So we have some pieces that are sort of getting correlated all in real time. And the beauty of this one was that we really got to explore the case management features. So here we see our spearphishing alarm coming in. And again, I think it's really helpful to note, red is bad. So, I mean, 91 risk score. Oh yeah, we're gonna immediately pay attention to what's going on there. We've got a phishing attempt coming in. We know that the phishing has, affected a particular user, what have you. But I think that, that red coloring immediately draws our attention to this, and so we can start creating a case from this. And so it's just a matter of, again, very easily going there and sort of saying, hey, new case, generate a case from this, which was awesome. Then what we can do is drill into the alarm. So we've got a new case built, spearphishing case. In this case, Vaughn's getting targeted. So we gave it it's got a specific priority around it. We've got a specific date range for, kind of when we went through this. And now we're just going in and drilling down. So we're seeing, the host that was impacted. We're seeing the user that was impacted. We're seeing potentially, other senders that were involved, etc. So we can start drilling down into sort of what's going on here. Then we added that alarm. So we purposefully went in and said, hey, everything associated with that particular alarm, add to the case. So once again, we're in that alarm. We can just add it to the case with one or two clicks, really simply. And so now this is associated with the case that we created. Now we're going to go take a look at some of the other things that were a part of that. So what we see is the user system, because we now know the system involved, with some other unusual activities. So we've got new sorts of alarms being triggered that we can start going down and sort of drilling into. And what you can see here is that this one is one associated with quote-unquote malware, because there was activity going out and trying to talk to a known threat watch list. And so this has been associated with botnet activity and so forth. And so it got flagged because, hey, anybody talking to that site or that domain or what have you is something we need to maybe go check up on. Maybe it's an accident, maybe it's not, but we're going to go take a look at it. And so you can see here it's HTTP activity. We see the host that was impacted. We see, the region that was impacted, etc. So we've got something that indicates, hey, number one, we just saw a phish. Number two, we now see some HTTP activity, which doesn't look good. And sure enough, we also see a brute force account logon attempt that's associated with that system using the PSExec tool against a neighboring system with an admin account. So three distinct things happening here, right? Number one, we got the phish. Number two, we saw that attempt to go out to a known botnet, maybe CNC command and control area. Number three, we see some obvious types of attacks going on right there in the environment from sort of a lateral movement or pivoting standpoint. So yeah, sure enough, user logon attempts, a bunch of failure events, so like a huge number of failure events going on sort of simultaneously. If you take a look at the top object here, you can see PSExec service.exe. So this is something unusual. We see the administrator user being cited. All bad news for us. And what we also see is this attempt to send outbound data exfil. So we have new alarms trying to go out, and we see SSH attempting to go out, and we see some external hosts outside the environment that are trying to be accessed, and some new flow data from the network side of things saying unusual network traffic originating outbound from this system. So you can start piecing together this story within minutes, really. I mean, it's just a matter of taking a look at the different individual alarms that are being triggered not only at the host but at the network levels, drilling down, finding those correlated pieces, and ultimately then drilling even further down, perhaps into, in this case, you can see it's network traffic and it's syslog data. But the beautiful thing is we actually can take PCAPs of that network traffic and add that into our case. So we captured this PCAP with our network monitoring. This is the SSH traffic that was used for the sort of lateral movement and exfiltration attempt. We simply added that into our case, brought it over, so not only the alarms, but in this case, even real PCAP data that somebody could import into other network monitoring or analysis tools to really try to sift through, as long as we had the ability to sort of inspect it. So again, just to wrap us up here, I know that was sort of a, boom, boom, boom with lots of different steps. But the great thing about that entire case that I just went through is that all of that stuff happened very quickly and with literally just the most intuitive way I could even possibly describe to you. I was able to click my way quickly down into all of those individual pieces and parts, create a case, add things to the case, and I could have gone, in a lot of different directions from that point, but I think you get the idea. This was a matter of 5 minutes from start to finish. Saw the alarms, went in and got everything, created the case, added stuff to the case, and for security professionals that are tasked with sort of keeping up with what's going on in their environments, this is huge. So we need tools that are easier. We need tools that allow us to get that visibility, pull back data and reports and events as quickly as possible. And not only that, we need to be able to respond to stuff either in an automated or a triggered fashion, with some degree of assurance that we can do so effectively. So had a lot of fun playing around with LogRhythm 7. Was really impressed by those features. And with that, I think we're going to move off into Q&A.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is for Seth. Does the system monitor look at AD changes, or can it?
Yeah, good question, and it kind of came up in some of the use cases here that David was going into. And one, before I jump into the question, just want to thank David again just for all the work and really going through the 7.1 feature set and platform and really digging into it and putting it through its paces. And so we greatly appreciate you doing that, and certainly looking forward to the research paper when that becomes available. And I hope everyone will take a look at that. To answer the question specifically, so yeah, we do have capabilities to monitor Active Directory and domain controllers. We've built in or out-of-the-box analytics, as Dave presented to that recognizes activities and then it sets a risk score to them. So individual activities, adding a user to a group may not be that interesting or that concerning. But we can recognize that in addition to other activities that now may allow that one activity of that user being added to a group now to be seen as something that is risky. So yeah, we do monitor for those activities, not just as isolated events, but also in connection with other activities that may represent something of risk to the organization.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to mention that the white paper will be available in February of 2017. Okay, this next question is for Vaughn. Can those case files be exported to an open standard to be given to law enforcement or third party who don't have LogRhythm?
Yeah, they can. We have Case API available to allow integration with Case that can be done through workflows or for exporting data.
All right, thank you. Seth, you used an example in the presentation to search for all logs classified as malware. How is that classified? Did it require custom rules? Also, would you have seen the same level of performance if the search was unstructured?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it actually brings up one of the main capabilities you get with LogRhythm is an extensive library to process data as that data is being ingested. We have a dedicated labs team that does nothing but develops what we call machine data intelligence processing rules. So those processing rules are actually categorizing and classifying all data as it's being coming in, and that's what allowed Dave to do a search on all those activities that have been classified as a malware type activity and be able to pull that data up. So that's not work. That's not a custom rule. That's not work that customers have to do on their own. They can really leverage the work that the labs team has performed. I believe we have library for over 800 different systems, applications, devices that are maintained and added to each quarter. Now the second part of that question was, so we did a search on, essentially on structured data, which is that classification, that particular log had been classified as malware. But we do have unstructured search as well. Dave mentioned this also, that you can search against unstructured search terms. We're tokenizing the full raw log. So not in addition to that, the classifications, the categorization we're assigning logs to, we do tag metadata in each of those logs based on a pretty specific schema that you can rely on. And that's all the work that the lab SIEM is doing, but you could also search on just search terms against the raw logs also with unstructured search. And the tokenization we're using, this is search engine technology. So yeah, the speed of that unstructured search would have been returned pretty the same as if I was searching against structured data due to that tokenization that's occurred.
Okay, thank you. This question came in, I'm not sure if it was during Vaughn or Seth's last answer, but it seems like in your example, only certain accounts are being monitored for spear phishing. Why wouldn't you want all accounts monitored in this way?
I can take that one. This is Vaughn. So it is. So in the spearphishing example, we picked that one up through threatless integration through I think it was subject off of a spearphishing. Yet we would. It just in the demo environment, we only had a few accounts that were available for the email system that caused it to fire. But yeah, in general, we would want to monitor all accounts because we are all subject to spearphishing.
All right, thank you. Can you talk about integration with threat intelligence sources?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we do have integration through our threat intelligence service. We have built-in integration for a number of the commercially available threat lists as well as some of the open source ones. In addition, we can do custom sticks, taxi feeds, and then we also have the ability to import threat feeds essentially as a flat text file. So there's a number of different formats that we can integrate third party.
Thanks, Vaughn. What is 300K MPS equal in terms of gigabytes per day?
I think that one was about 10 gigabytes per day. Terabytes. I'm sorry. Yeah. And we assumed, assuming about 400 bytes per message, average message size, about what it works out to.
All right, great, thank you. You used Network Monitor in one example. Is that just a packet capture device, or what else does Network Monitor do?
So a Network Monitor does deep packet inspection and identifies flows that are going across at the application level. So if it's SSH running across any particular port, it identifies it as SSH. If SSH running across port 80, for instance, it shows SSH rather than HTTP traffic. It does full packet capture. It does selective full packet capture using smart capture, so the ability to capture only certain types of data and not others. I like to give the example of YouTube traffic. We don't really necessarily want to capture YouTube traffic. There's not much forensic value in that. In addition, we have deep packet analytics, the ability to use analytics at the network level. And we have a a console that we can operate as a standalone as well. So Network Monitor can integrate with our SIEM or operate standalone on your network.
All right, thanks. I think we have time for one more question. In the malicious activity alarm, Smart Response disabled the account and logged the user out. Was that run automatically, or did someone have to approve it?
In that particular case, we ran it automatically. However, we do have the ability to use workflows or to build workflows that allows us to go up to 3 levels of approval. So you can have like maybe the analyst will approve the smart response, or you can have maybe the manager, or levels of escalation, particularly if you have sensitive smart responses that you want to have multiple approvals. It depends on the needs of the organization.
All right, well with that we are out of time. Thank you so much Dave, Seth, and Vaughn for your great presentation, and to LogRhythm for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.